This is not the kind of crisis that arrives with a clean beginning, a clear villain, and a neat diplomatic exit waiting at the end. It is the kind that builds in layers. A drone strike on a commercial ship, a tanker hit in a supposedly protected lane, a sudden American strike package, a public threat from the White House, and then almost too quietly, an emergency meeting request from Tehran. What makes the Strait of Hormuz so dangerous right now is not only the firepower gathered around it. It is the possibility that the people negotiating peace may not fully control the forces, still trying to shape the battlefield. As of this morning, that is the real operational picture. This is not a distant summary of a conflict that happened months ago and faded into background noise. It is the current state of the Strait of Hormuz, after 4 days of strikes, retaliation, tanker attacks, emergency diplomatic messaging, and a truth social post from the President of the United States that forced governments across the world to reassess the situation almost instantly. President Trump wrote that there may come a point when the United States is no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job it had already started. Then came the sentence that changed the entire tone of the crisis. The Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist, not weakened, not punished, not contained, no longer exist. That line came from the sitting American president in public, while the region was already on edge. Roughly 4 hours later, both sides quietly agreed to stand down and meet again in Doha on the 30th of June for technical talks. Whether those two events were directly connected is something others can argue over. But the timing speaks loudly enough to understand why this moment matters. The sequence has to be put back together. Without the sequence, the current crisis looks like noise. With it, the picture becomes far more serious. On the 25th of June, the IRGC attacked the Singapore-flagged cargo vessel MV Ever Lovely with a one-way attack drone as the ship was exiting the Strait of Hormuz along the coast of Oman. This was not a vessel wandering through disputed northern waters or testing a military boundary. It was operating inside the Oman-facilitated safe corridor, the southern route created under the Memorandum of Understanding so commercial ships could move through the strait without IRGC interference. In other words, Iran had just agreed to respect a lane, and then one of its own military arms struck a ship inside it. CENTCOM responded with strikes on Iranian targets. The message that followed through back channels was blunt. You hit ships in the protected corridor. We hit your sites. Stand down, and this ends here. Iran did not stand down. At 4:30 a.m. Eastern Time, on the 27th of June, the IRGC launched another attack drone. This time it struck the Panama-flagged tanker Mount Cuckoo near the strait while it was carrying more than 2 million barrels of crude. The cargo was Qatari oil headed toward Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates. That detail matters because Qatar had helped broker the diplomatic framework. Iran used the ceasefire window around that framework to attack a tanker carrying Qatari crude. That is not just escalation. It is either a deliberate message from a unified Iranian command structure that the agreement means nothing, or it is evidence of a military faction acting beyond the control of the civilian leadership that signed the deal. Neither answer is reassuring. CENTCOM answered within hours. The response was a 10-target strike package executed over roughly 90 minutes. The target list included surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, drone storage, mine-laying capability, and positions around Qeshm Island and the Sirk region. These were not symbolic targets selected for headlines. They were the physical backbone of IRGC maritime pressure in and around the strait. The island facilities, fortified nodes, and support sites used to harass shipping and maintain control over movement through Hormuz. 10 targets were hit. 90 minutes later, every site on that list was reported destroyed. No American aircraft were lost. The footage that surfaced afterward told its own story. It showed what happens when Iranian military installations are taken offline by coordinated Navy and Air Force strike packages, moving through a target list built and updated by CENTCOM intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems in real time. Radar sites, drone warehouses, mine-laying platforms, communications nodes, and air defense infrastructure were all part of the package. Two of the sites were reportedly new IRGC construction, built during the ceasefire window itself. While negotiations continued quietly in the background, the IRGC was expanding its military footprint along the strait. The American ISR network found the new sites, identified their function, and removed them before they could be fully folded into operations. The way a 90-minute package like that likely unfolds is worth understanding, because it explains why Iran has not yet found a reliable answer after months of conflict. The F-35 goes in first. Air Force F-35As and Navy F-35Cs were almost certainly part of the package. Their value is not only stealth, it is stealth paired with sensor fusion. The aircraft collects data from onboard radar, electronic warfare systems, data links, satellites, and other platforms. Then merges it into a single picture before the opposing side can build a useful track. In simple terms, the F-35 sees the room before the room knows the door has opened, against an ARGC radar site or air defense node on Cusham Island. The job is direct: find it, fix it, and strike it before the radar crew can make sense of the threat. The F-35 effectively blacks out the cameras before walking through the front entrance. By the time the people inside understand what has happened, the facility is already gone. Behind the stealth aircraft likely came F-16 Block 50 or 52 aircraft in the Wild Weasel role, built for suppression of enemy air defenses. For months, F-16 CJ crews have been flying this kind of mission against Iranian air defense infrastructure. They know the terrain, they know the radar emissions, and they understand how IRGC operators behave when nearby sites start disappearing. The HARM missile is built for that moment. It locks onto radar emissions and follows the signal home. For an Iranian radar operator, the choice becomes impossible. Turn the radar off and go blind, or turn it on and make yourself the target. Neither option stops what is coming. Then comes the heavy precision work, the kind the F-15 E-Strike Eagle was built to deliver. The aircraft can carry a massive precision payload, and in this environment, the upgraded bunker busting capability matters. The GBU-72, a 5,000-pound weapon with laser and GPS guidance working together, gives crews flexibility when the airspace is dangerous. A purely laser-guided bomb depends on the laser staying where it needs to be. If the aircraft has to maneuver defensively, the weapon can lose the correct aim point. With GPS guidance, maintaining the target coordinates, the pilot can react to threats and the weapon can still complete its job. That matters in a theater where Iranian drone swarms have reportedly appeared in return corridors, possibly carrying foreign origin sensors or seekers. In that kind of space, guidance redundancy is not a luxury, it is survival. And mission completion in the same package. The F-15E also adds something that sensors alone do not replace: human eyes. The pilot keeps the outside picture alive, while the weapons systems officer manages targeting and sensors. Man and machine are watching together, which is one reason the Strike Eagle still matters, even when fifth-generation platforms are leading the way. Iran did retaliate. Missiles and drones targeted Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, where American personnel support regional operations every day. Missiles also targeted the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, the center of American naval power in the Gulf. CENTCOM reported no casualties and no significant damage at either installation. The IRGC then claimed it destroyed 8 American military facilities. The footage Iran circulated showed small drone impacts on peripheral structures. The difference between the claim and the confirmed damage was not a minor dispute over wording. It was the gap between what Iran's remaining strike capacity could actually accomplish and what its information machine needed people at home to believe. The IRGC statement, after the 27th of June exchange, tried to frame the situation as deterrence. It warned that any aggression regardless of pretext or target size, would receive a crushing response. But the words came from a force that had just lost 10 sites in one night, from a navy whose maritime infrastructure had been steadily dismantled across several strike packages since February, and from a system already trying to explain away the widening difference between public rhetoric and battlefield reality. At some point, that gap becomes too large to bridge without asking the audience to suspend disbelief. The rhetoric is not the most important part. What matters more is what Iran's foreign minister, Iraqi, said after the 27th of June exchange. He is the lead nuclear negotiator, the civilian face of Tehran's back-channel engagement, and the person meant to represent diplomatic discipline. He publicly stated that Iran would exercise sole management and oversight of the Strait of Hormuz for the next 30 days, not the IRGC, not a rogue commander, Iran's civilian government. That statement does not sound like a government calmly implementing a framework to reopen the strait. It sounds like a government either unable to control its military or trying to perform a careful domestic act for hardliners who fear strategic surrender. That brings the crisis to its central question: who is actually in charge inside Iran right now? The name that keeps surfacing around maritime harassment operations is Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, commander of the IRGC Navy. He has been publicly asserting Iranian routing authority over the strait since before the memorandum was signed. He may also be the most important institutional actor at the table, because the IRGC Navy's control of Hormuz is not only about national pride, it is about money, loyalty, and power. For decades, the ability to threaten, tax, and pressure commercial shipping through Hormuz has given the IRGC Navy enormous leverage. Estimates place that leverage as high as $90 billion a year. That is not an abstract number in a policy paper, it is cash flow. It funds operations, buys loyalty, sustains factions, and allows the IRGC Navy to operate with a level of independence from the civilian budget, asking Tangsiri and the IRGC Navy to surrender the routing architecture of the strait is not asking them to sign a softer maritime policy. It is asking them to give up the revenue stream that supports their institutional independence. They are unlikely to do that voluntarily, while they believe there is still time to prevent it. After the Doha process was announced, their behavior looked like that of an institution, watching the door close and trying to force the issue before it locks for CENTCOM. The problem is that Hormuz is now one of the most contested air and maritime spaces on Earth. Iranian air defense crews have had months to adapt, relocate, harden, and rebuild surface-to-air missiles, coastal radars, concealed drone launch platforms, and mine-laying vessels hidden among civilian traffic all complicate the picture. The IRGC has also had time to study American strike profiles, radar timing, and electronic warfare signatures. It is not standing still. Reports of jellyfish-shaped drone swarms in American return corridors, possibly fitted with Chinese or Russian origin sensors, suggest an adversary trying to develop a counter. The adaptation is real, but adaptation is not the same as success. On the night of the 27th of June, CENTCOM still put 10 targets on the floor in 90 minutes without losing a single aircraft. The suppression plan worked. The stealth penetration worked. The precision weapons worked. The ISR picture was complete enough to hit dispersed targets without fratricide, without collateral damage to commercial shipping, and without American casualties. The IRGC Navy's remaining drone threat is real, but it is increasingly understood. The one-way drones that struck the MV Everlovely and the MT Kokuku were likely Shade 136 variants, or IRGC Navy specific designs. They are cheap, expendable, and available in numbers. They are vulnerable to GPS jamming, but dangerous in swarms large enough to overwhelm point defenses. That is what makes them frustrating. A single drone may be crude, but a campaign of cheap drones can stretch expensive defenses. CENTCOM's answer has been persistent detection and faster targeting, autonomous ISR platforms, AI-assisted systems, and linked aircraft can share a picture quickly enough to find launch assets as they move. Every time Tangsiri rebuilds or shifts drone capability along the strait, American surveillance has to find it again. That is the race now. Iranian operational security against American persistent surveillance. Based on the results of the last 4 months, CENTCOM appears to be winning that race. But winning, it is not passive. It requires flight hours, sensors, strike readiness, and carrier-based presence sustained day after day. Iran's behavior since the 25th of June makes more sense when viewed through that lens. The Southern Oman Corridor, created by the memorandum, was designed to let commercial shipping move through the strait without passing the northern waters, where IRGC patrol boats and fast attack craft traditionally hold influence. If commercial ships begin using that southern lane safely and routinely, the IRGC Navy's leverage over oil traffic weakens, even if no formal document strips its power on paper. The physical fact of ships moving safely without IRGC involvement is what erodes the system. Tangsiri and the people around him understand this. They may not be trying to restart a full war with the United States. They may be trying to make the southern route feel unsafe enough that shipping operators return to the northern route, where IRGC influence still matters. Drone strikes on commercial vessels can be seen as harassment meant to raise insurance costs and risk perception. Destroying a tanker would create a diplomatic disaster. Damaging one enough to trigger claims, alerts, and fear can achieve the practical goal. Fear becomes a routing tool that gives the U.S. Navy a second mission alongside strikes. Keep the southern corridor visibly protected. Commercial operators do not care only what a memorandum says. They care whether their ships can move and whether insurers believe the route is viable. If the industry decides the southern Oman corridor is unsafe, the IRGC Navy achieves its strategic aim without defeating CENTCOM. The counter is demonstrated protection, destroyer presence, carrier-based air cover, rapid interception, and immediate strikes on launch infrastructure after harassment attempts. Every drone that hits a commercial vessel without consequence becomes evidence that the corridor is not protected. Every drone that is intercepted or followed by a strike on the system that launched it becomes evidence that it is. CENTCOM has consistently chosen the second option. The question is whether that consistency can be sustained at the pace the IRGC Navy is willing to absorb losses. The Doha talks scheduled for June 30 are therefore the next major test. Iran requested the emergency meeting. Not CENTCOM, not the State Department. Tehran. That request came after 10 Iranian military sites were destroyed in 90 minutes, and after the American president publicly suggested the future existence of the Islamic Republic was conditional. The request appears to be the civilian faction in Tehran signaling that it wants an off-ramp before the crisis reaches a level where its options become politically or physically unsurvivable. But the harder question is whether those negotiators can actually deliver a military stand-down. If Tangsiri and the IRGC Navy hardliners have enough autonomy to launch drone strikes during a ceasefire without authorization from the civilian negotiators, then any agreement in Doha is only as strong as the IRGC Navy's willingness to honor it. And an institution whose power rests on controlling Hormuz has little internal incentive to honor an agreement that removes that control. That fractured command picture may be the most important variable in the crisis. Civilian negotiators need to look strong enough at home to avoid being outflanked by hardliners. Military commanders need to prove continued relevance to their own networks. The authority vacuum created by the reported elimination of the supreme leader on the first day of the conflict has left multiple factions trying to fill the space with shows of strength, sometimes in direct conflict with what other factions are negotiating through back channels. That is how the world gets the strange pattern of the last 96 hours, signed frameworks and tanker strikes, peace talks, and claims of sole authority over an international waterway, diplomatic gestures, and military harassment. It may not be a brilliant deception plan. It may be simpler and more dangerous. The right hand and left hand of the Iranian state may no longer be taking instructions from the same brain. That internal fracture is both weakness and danger. It is weakness because Iran may struggle to coordinate a coherent strategic escalation against American interests while factions compete with one another. It is danger because a rogue or semi-autonomous commander does not need a national strategy to hit a tanker, fire a drone at an airbase, or mine a shipping lane. He needs capability and institutional cover. Tangsiri appears to have both. CENTCOM's strategic advantage, if the Doha talks fail, is that the United States can keep striking IRGC military infrastructure without necessarily forcing the civilian leadership to formally authorize a broad response. It may not be able to coordinate. Each strike removes assets. Each removed asset reduces the IRGC Navy's ability to harass shipping. 4 months of cumulative attrition have already degraded the Hormuz control network. Further packages would degrade it more. The unknown is where the curve crosses, the point at which commercial shipping can use the southern corridor without treating the IRGC Navy as a meaningful operational threat. There is, still, an economic ceiling on American escalation. Oil prices had been drifting back toward pre-conflict levels, which is a significant diplomatic and domestic achievement for an administration sensitive to energy costs. A larger campaign against Iranian power infrastructure, bridges, or industrial systems could reverse that trend fast and possibly shock the global economy. That constraint is real. It explains why the current American posture has remained surgical, focused on military infrastructure rather than Iran's broader economic architecture. The precision is not only about capability. It is a strategic choice. The aim is to keep the economic blast radius contained while increasing pressure on the ERGC's operational capacity. The global economy keeps breathing while the military pressure tightens. That is a narrow lane to drive through, and the United States is trying to stay inside it. While attention is fixed on Hormuz, another major development is unfolding in the air domain over Europe. President Zelensky announced a 40-day Ukrainian influence operation led by security services to strike strategic Russian targets with drone swarms. In one night this past week, Russian air defenses reportedly had to engage 660 Ukrainian drive ones across 12 regions at the same time. Most were shot down, but some got through and hit selected targets in Moscow and nearby strategic areas, including facilities tied to ballistic missile and drone production. Ukraine's drone campaign is no longer a nuisance. It has become a systematic attrition effort against Russian defense industry, built on 2 years of battlefield learning, with autonomous and AI-enabled swarming. That matters because it is happening at the same time. The Hormuz crisis is demanding American attention. 2. High-intensity theaters are now pulling on the same strategic bandwidth. Platforms can be powerful, but bandwidth is still finite. Back in the Strait, the situation as of the 29th of June is stark. Iran has requested emergency talks in Doha. The meeting is set for the 30th of June. A stand-down was agreed only hours after Trump's public warning. The IRGC Navy has not formally withdrawn its claim of routing authority over the Strait. Admiral Tangsiri has not publicly stepped back. 10 Iranian military sites were destroyed in 90 minutes on the 27th of June, including 2 reportedly built during the ceasefire window. Commercial shipping through the southern Oman corridor remains under pressure from a harassment campaign designed to make the route look too expensive and too risky. CENTCOM has reported no casualties and no aircraft losses across the strike cycle. The coming week will answer the question that matters most. Is there a faction inside the Iranian government with enough actual power over the IRGC Navy to deliver a real stand-down, or is Tangsiri now the effective power in Iranian decision-making on the Strait, while civilian negotiators in Doha speak for a government that cannot control its most active military arm? If Doha produces a framework and the IRGC Navy violates it within 72 hours, the answer becomes hard to avoid. If that second answer is correct, the American calculus changes. The words in Trump's post start to sound less like rhetoric and more like operational signaling. The B-2 bombers at Whiteman Air Force Base are not irrelevant to this crisis. They have already demonstrated the ability to fly intercontinental round-trip strike missions against hardened targets in Iran without forward basing. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator exists in the inventory. The targeting database built over months is reportedly deep, current, and refined by real-time surveillance during the crisis. The B-21 Raider, with longer range and improved low observable characteristics, is approaching operational deployment on a timeline measured in months. Iran's civilian leadership knows this. The pragmatic faction going into Doha knows the military balance is moving in a direction that does not improve for Tehran, with time, adaptation, or unmarked foreign equipment arriving by cargo aircraft. They know persistent American surveillance is watching movements around sensitive sites. They know the IAEA is waiting with inspection equipment and a memorandum that says access should be granted. And they know the American president has publicly written the alternative to a negotiated resolution in 7 blunt words. The question in Doha is whether the people across the table from American negotiators have enough institutional authority inside Tehran to make a promise that Tangsiri and the IRGC Navy will honor. If they do, the president's sentence may become the pressure that forced a diplomatic breakthrough. If they do not, that same sentence may be remembered as the moment the next phase became unavoidable. The Strait of Hormuz woke up this morning with the memory of a tanker carrying 2 million barrels of Qatari crude, with 10 IRGC sites that existed on the 26th of June, gone by the 28th of June, with a public American threat hanging over Tehran, and with an emergency Doha meeting that suggests someone inside Iran understood the warning. Nobody outside a small number of rooms in Washington and Tehran knows which way this turns next. But the bombers are ready. The surveillance picture is current. The target list is no longer theoretical. And tomorrow's meeting may decide whether this crisis bends back toward diplomacy or breaks into something much harder to stop.